Thank you. The final item of business is the members' business debate on motion 16002 in the name of Jackson Carlaw on Holocaust Memorial Day 2025 for a better future. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Jackson Carlaw to open the debate. Around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. 80 years ago, we were a world at war, and the consequence of that war was tens of millions of people dead across the world and the extermination of 1/3 of the world's Jewish population by Nazi Germany. It wasn't the first Holocaust of which I was aware. Despite growing up in a community where so much of the Jewish population in Scotland lived, they didn't talk about it. It was just not mentioned. Members of families living next door to me had no idea that their parents had been involved in the Holocaust or that they'd lost relatives in the Holocaust. In fact, the first Holocaust of which I was aware was the Holocaust in Cambodia, the genocide there between 1975 and 1979. It was there in front of television as I grew up as a teenager. 25% of the population of that country murdered by Pol Pot in the killing fields, often not with bullets but with a pickaxe through the head. 60% of those who died were executed. Many of the children who were not executed were abducted, indoctrinated, and were then themselves forced to commit the most appalling atrocities themselves. That was the genocide with which I was most familiar. It was Dr. Jacob Bronowski who first hinted in his television series, The Ascent of Man, when he was able and allowed to visit Auschwitz concentration camp, then behind the Iron Curtain, who walked, overcome with emotion, fully suited, into puddles, picking up, as he thought, the ashes of those who died there, including most of his family. He called it the tragedy of mankind. Presiding Officer, 1.2 million Scots have been born since this Parliament first met. The first Holocaust Memorial Day was in 2001. Why is it so important that we commemorate these events? Because for those young people, it's the testament and the determination of our generation to ensure that those events are not forgotten that is so important to them. So I applaud previous Secretary of State Jim Murphy and our former presiding officer Ken McIntosh, who were instrumental in ensuring that there were visits to Auschwitz concentration camp for young people. I commend the Vision Schools Scotland programme promoted by Dr. Paula Cowan and the University of the West of Scotland that does so much for continuous Holocaust education, now in every single local authority across Scotland. And I applaud the Scottish Government for the funding that they have made available to ensure that these educational programmes can continue. And I'm so pleased that nearly all of our First Ministers, including John Swinney, the current First Minister, have stood as I did in Auschwitz and been overwhelmed, I think, with the enormity and emotions that will never ever leave any of us who have actually visited that place. But anti-Semitism continues. It's why it's so important this education continues. 10 years ago, there was the attack on Charlie Hebdo in Paris. Danny Finkelstein, in his memoir Hitler, Stalin, Mum and Dad, said that for the first time, and this was prescient because it was in the summer of the year before last, that for the first time he worried and feared that there could be events similar to the Holocaust unfolding before us again. And just 80 years ago, in the last few days, he brought to our attention again his grandmother, who died as she was being liberated from Bergen-Belsen, with her two daughters, his mother, one of them, sitting by her side on the train. She had given everything to keep them safe and alive in Bergen-Belsen, and literally expired from the effort as the train departed the camp. On a local way, can I say that, I'm delighted that St Ninian's High School in my constituency of Eastwood is in the top 3 of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust Secondary Schools competition, tasked with creating a memorial, in this case to the genocide in Bosnia. They've created a wreath made of flowers from Srebrenica to commit the significant 30th anniversary of the genocide that took place there. Mearns Castle High School tonight are at an event in my constituency, which unfortunately I'm not at because I'm introducing this debate. Lexi, Sam and Anna from the Anne Frank ambassadors are reflecting on their experiences, and they will be here tomorrow in this Parliament participating in the Holocaust Memorial event we have here. And of course, on various occasions over this last year, I've made reference to my late constituent Henry Wooga, who was the last of the Kindertransport to survive. They need to know, because it was young people like them who stood up and did what could be done against Hitler and the Nazis. The White Rose campaign in Munich University, the brother and sister Hans and Sophie Scholl, who distributed literature trying to call a halt to what was happening, who as teenagers were then taken by the Nazis and beheaded, facing upwards, for simply campaigning against that genocide. Auschwitz, for those who've been there, the camp designed and run by Rudolf Höss, who had previously run Dachau concentration camp, the first one that I visited, from which he took the Arbeit macht frei slogan, because he felt that was the easier way to lure people to their deaths, to make them think they were doing something useful. To stand, as I'm sure the First Minister did, between blocks 10 and 11 in Auschwitz. Auschwitz once, not the extermination camp, but Auschwitz one. And to recognise that people were just brought up, children, people of all ages, put up against a wall, a bullet fired through them, murdered for being nothing other than being Jewish. This week, His Majesty the King, world leaders, all stood in front of Auschwitz II's entrance gateway. We've probably all seen the images. What struck me, and I imagine struck so many, was just how few and how frail the survivors now are, and yet how disturbed they were, not just by the memory of being there, but of their fears for the future. That's why we have such a duty placed on us. I've not tonight rehearsed many of the stories that I've told in all of the years I've participated in this debate since I was first elected. Others I know will contribute their memories. My memories of that camp will never leave me. And so I echo the words of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust. We must become the generation who carry forward the legacy of the witnesses, remember those who were murdered, and challenge those who would distort or deny the past, or who discriminate and persecute today. We can all mark Holocaust Memorial Day 2025 and commit to making a better future for us all. What one of those survivors said, and this is the thing I think that can strike right home to any one of us, is they do not want their experience of man's inhumanity to be experience of any yet to come of man's humanity. That's why it's so important we remember. That's why it's so important that we stand firmly. That's why it's so important that the young people of this country who are so engaged continue to be so and stand with us to ensure that this Holocaust never happens again.
Thank you, Mr Carlow. We will now move to the open debate. Backbench speeches of around 4 minutes, and I call Kenneth Gibson to be followed by Alexander Stewart. Mr Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I congratulate Jackson Carlaw in securing this timely debate 80 years after Soviet troops liberated Auschwitz. It happened, therefore it can happen again. These sobering words of Holocaust survivor Primo Levi remind us of the importance of memory and vigilance for this year's Holocaust Memorial Day theme, for a better future. The Holocaust, or Shoah, was one of the most devastating and morally catastrophic events in human history, claiming the lives of 6 million Jewish people systematically murdered. At Auschwitz-Birkenau, 1.1 million people died, primarily in gas chambers. More than 90% of them were Jews. Across occupied Europe, the Nazis also killed 3.3 million Soviet prisoners of war, Polish intellectuals, resistance fighters, Romani and disabled people, political dissidents, homosexuals and other targeted groups. Stalin said, "One person dead is a tragedy, a million is a statistic." Yet these figures are not mere abstractions. They remind us of individual lives brutally destroyed in terrifying circumstances and the constant need to confront hatred and the abuse of power for a better future. The seeds of the Holocaust were sown by violence combined with a manipulation of language and legalities. The 1935 Nuremberg laws institutionalised the exclusion of Jewish people from German society, beginning the dehumanisation of an entire population. By 1939, the Nazis had stripped Jewish people of all their rights, setting the stage for genocide. The acts of barbarity committed in Nazi extermination camps, concentration camps, ghettos and in mass shootings and imposed starvation across occupied Eastern Europe remain incomprehensible. Among the most grotesque were the pseudo-scientific experiments conducted under the guise of medical research by Dr. Joseph Mengele. Victims, often child twins, suffered brutal extremes of hypothermia, lethal diseases and noxious chemicals, all when anaesthesia was withheld, thereby subjecting them to unimaginable agony. These horrors led to the Nuremberg Code, a milestone in medical ethics still guiding research today. Holocaust survivor testimonies remind us of our duty to prevent any reoccurrence. One such voice was that of Judith Rosenberg, deported to Auschwitz in 1944. Her first night was filled with terror as she witnessed the brutality that claimed countless lives. Judith faced constant violence, starvation and illness. Despite overwhelming odds, she survived, working in a factory repairing watches. This earned extra rations which she selflessly shared with her mother and sister. Liberated in 1945, Judith married Lieutenant Harold Rosenberg and forged a new life in Glasgow. Passing away 3 years ago, aged 98, Judith left a £500,000 bequest to the University of Strathclyde to advance quantum technology. Despite Scotland's reputation for tolerance, anti-Semitism is a troubling reality. In the last 3 months of 2023, there were 46 anti-Semitic hate incidents recorded in Scotland, the same number as in all of 2021. Although figures for last year are not yet available, I anticipate they will have risen further. Social media platforms such as X and Facebook have become cesspits of Holocaust denial and far-right extremism. According to the Anti-Defamation League, Holocaust denial content rose 30% between 2021 and 2023. Deniers aim to sow division and undermine truth. On digital platforms, coded language and memes are used. Hate groups target Jewish students at universities, and conspiracy theories are spread anonymously online. Yet even among such challenges, Scotland continues in its pursuit for a better future. The Holocaust Education Trust Lessons from Auschwitz programme takes Scottish students to Auschwitz-Birkenau to reflect on the relevance of the Holocaust today and share their learning with others. And my own constituency, individuals like David Cocker of Largs Academy now champion the importance of Holocaust education. Chosen as an ambassador for the Trust, David will share his reflections on his visit to Auschwitz during a commemorative service this weekend. The arts play a vital role in preserving Holocaust memory. Plays, films and literature are pivotal in keeping the conversation alive. Meanwhile, organisations like the Anne Frank Trust instil empathy and inclusion in young people. Education and commemoration alone, of course, cannot secure a better future. Combating anti-Semitism in the 21st century means social media companies must remove harmful content. Schools should encourage critical thinking and empathy. Organisations and leaders can amplify the voices of those impacted by anti-Semitism. Presiding Officer, as we reflect on the Holocaust, we must heed its lessons. As Premier Levi reminds us, it can happen again, but it's within our power to ensure it does not. Let's honour the memory of the victims and survivors for their sake and for the many generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Gibson. I now call Alexander Stewart to be followed by Paul O'Kane. Mr Stewart.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm happy to be speaking in support of this very important debate, and I congratulate and pay tribute to my colleague Jackson Carlo for bringing it to the Chamber. As our debate motion rightly says, 2025 marks the 80th anniversary since Auschwitz was liberated, as well as the 30th anniversary of the genocide in Bosnia. This year's Holocaust Memorial theme, For a Better Future, is highly appropriate. As the Holocaust Memorial Trust points out, anti-Semitism has increased significantly in the United Kingdom and globally. And this especially from the 7th of October attacks in 2023, which saw Israelis 1,200 people killed and over 250 hostages were seized. And we have seen the Gaza war thereafter, and many of these hostages are still not released. Extremism on all sides continues to exploit the situation and to stir up anti-Islamic and anti-Semitic in the United Kingdom. And as a result, many communities across the United Kingdom fear and are living under vulnerable. Hostility and suspicion continues to grow, and that is an area we all should be concerned about. We must also never forget the well-documented genocide in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur. Individuals are oppressed simply because... Absolutely.
Claire Adamson.
Ricardo. I was just reflecting on the genocides that you've mentioned, but given the situation in Ukraine, does he believe that it's regretful that as yet the Holodomor inflicted on the Ukrainian people by Stalin has not been recognised as a genocide in itself?
Alexander Stewart.
I thank Claire Adamson for the intervention, and I would concur. I think that is something that needs to be righted, for that is a huge wrong. Individuals are exposed and opposed because of the horrific crimes we've heard about, Deputy Presiding Officer. And as well as making Holocaust Memorial Day, I feel it's very important also to talk about gypsies, Romas and travelling people who were also subjected. Every year in June, as part of Gypsy Roma Travelling History Month, the Holocaust Memorial Trust also remembers and commemorates the richness of the Gypsy, Roma and travelling communities bring to everyday life, and they have done in the past. The Holocaust Memorial Trust also reminds us throughout the truly hideous crimes that took place in the 1940s, and the Jews were not the only ones that were managed and tackled by the Nazis and removed from many of their homelands and their communities. For over the decades around 1935, Europe's Roma were often labelled as gypsies. Historically, they were targeted by the Nazis, and they wanted, once again, total annihilation of that individuals. Harking back to 2023, I was delighted to host in Parliament here a group of young gypsy travellers, people who came from my region and talked about their experiences. They were very happy to discuss that they also felt even today persecuted, but they wanted to know about the horrors of the Holocaust and what affected their generations of travelling people in the 1930s and 1940s. It is also too easy for society to label on particular groups, whereas in reality they are all individual people with the right to learn, with the right to be heard and the right to survive. So in conclusion, Deputy Presiding Officer, as I have said in the past, we all should be committed to ensuring equality of opportunity for every single one of us. Deserves that within our communities, and we want to see and have the opportunity for individuals to participate, and we should not allow marginalised groups to become involved. And I and the Holocaust Memorial Trust sincerely hope that the Holocaust Memorial Day 2025 can be the opportunity for people to come together, to learn from, learn about the past and take action for a better future. Because we must never forget the heinous crimes that have taken place against humanity, and we must do all within our power to remember, remember, remember. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Stewart. I call Paul O'Kane, who's joining us remotely, to be followed by Maggie Chapman. Mr O'Kane.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And can I begin my contribution this evening by thanking Jackson Carlaw for securing this annual debate and for the partnership working that we have undertaken in helping to organise Holocaust Memorial Day commemorations in the Parliament this week. And I would urge colleagues to attend the commemoration event on Thursday evening. I know how important it is to many people across Scotland that we mark Holocaust Memorial Day, but in particular, I know how important it is to the Jewish community, a majority of whom live in East Renfrewshire, as I do, as Jackson Carlaw does, and it really is an honour to represent them along with Jackson Carlaw. As we've heard already this evening, this year we mark 80 years since the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. It was the largest of the Nazi death camps where murder was carried out on an industrial scale simply because people were different. Millions of Jewish people, Roma and Sinti people, LGBT, disabled people and others were murdered. And as we've heard already this evening, when you stand in the watchtower at Birkenau, it is hard not to be absolutely horrified by the sheer scale of a place that was designed by human beings for the systematic murder of other human beings. And over many years, I have had the great honour to meet people who are survivors of Auschwitz-Birkenau and survivors of the Holocaust. Many who came to Scotland, as Jackson Carlaw has alluded to, after the horrors of the war ended, and lived their lives just down the road from where I am sitting this evening. They went about their lives making a huge contribution to post-war Britain. Many of them gave themselves in public service and helped to build up our communities, and many of them, for a long time, did not speak of their experiences in the Holocaust. But many of them, later in life, chose to do that. And they chose to tell their story, they have told me, so that future generations would know about the horrors, the inhumanity, but also about the amazing stories of resilience, resistance, and the righteousness of others. And at this point, I would like to pay tribute to the many organisations who support survivors and have supported survivors to keep those stories alive and to ensure that education continues. The Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, the Holocaust Education Trust, Gathering the Voices, Vision Schools, the Anne Frank Trust, and many others. And I know that many colleagues will speak of their work this evening. We also remember tonight the subsequent genocides that have occurred in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur, and all those who give testimony and support commemoration of those genocides. And tonight we reflect on the 30th anniversary of the genocide in Bosnia. And I want to pay a particular tribute, if I can, to Beyond Srebrenica, the organisation who do so much work to educate people about what happened in Bosnia, what happened in Srebrenica, and how we learn from that and move forward. And as we've heard from, and we will hear from contributions this evening, all of this work is vital, particularly as survivors of the Holocaust pass away. And it falls to all of us to help tell those stories, because we do know that anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, and the distortion of fact are on the rise. And this has been brought into sharp focus just recently by many research studies showing that too many young people in our own country can't name Auschwitz or any other death camp and don't have a grasp of what happened in the Holocaust. The theme this year for Holocaust Memorial Day is Take Action for a Better Future. For me, and I know for many others, that must be a future where the horrors of the Holocaust and subsequent genocides are taught and known by all, so that the words never again can have chance of meaning. And I think I would agree with Jackson Carlaw in paying tribute to the work that is done across parliaments and governments in order to ensure that that happens. The future must be guided by us, but in the hands of young people. So in closing tonight, I will give space to words I heard at the Glasgow Reform Synagogue on Saturday by a young man, Ben Bland, who I think summed up the challenge of the present age, but also the hope embodied for a better future. He said, "The future nowadays seems bleak. The news and social media are playing an important part in this, creating division and sowing seeds of hatred directed at those least deserving of it, whilst lauding praise to those who deserve it even less. So here today I want to make the effort to turn away from it, looking inward for my vision, my hope for the future. In it I see barriers of prejudice built between themselves and taken down, with olive branches extended. Walls of prejudice like homophobia, racism, sectarianism, xenophobia should be cast aside. I see people in the future being more kind and understanding to each other, understanding of themselves and what they can do to help those around them. I want the people around me to have a better understanding of what it means to be open-minded. I hope that people can display more empathy and sympathy for each other. I hope that people can begin to understand that with a little bit more consideration of others, we can start to make our collective experience of life a little bit easier and more pleasant. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr O'Kane. I now call Maggie Chapman to be followed by Liam MacArthur. Ms Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to speak this evening, so I thank Jackson Carlaw for securing this debate. A memorial is an act of remembrance, and today we remember in two senses. We remember who it was who bore this unutterable pain, each individual and precious human being, those now lost to the world and those who remain with us. We remember them with love, with sorrow and with anger, reiterating the humanity that their oppressors tried so hard to deny. And we remember how it happened. And for us as politicians and parliamentarians, that is perhaps the harder memory. For the Holocaust was not an act of insurgency, a violation of domestic law and order. It came about not in spite of political processes, elections, legislation, policy implementation, but through and because of them. There were some bystanders who knew exactly what was going on. There were others who knew nothing. But in between, across Europe and beyond, was a wide spectrum of simultaneous knowledge and ignorance, of eyes that were closed, faces turned away. Reassurance that rhetoric was just that, and only that genocidal intent was the expression of legitimate concern, that there was no need to open doors or hearts, that reality was still represented by the diplomacy of gentlemen, and the bodies of children lay uncovered. We have learned the story of this deep, deep horror, but have we learned to recognise its narrative when it comes again, with different clothes, different names, different labels? When the richest man in the world salutes the most powerful man in the world with a gesture that specifically recalls that older story, do we shrug and move on? When the most powerful man uses the language of cleaning about the dispossession of already dispossessed people, already bereft of their children, do we pretend not to have heard? Hannah Arendt wrote, in the context of the Holocaust, about the banality of evil. For evil can be banal, can be ridiculous, can come with buffoonery and bluster, without subtlety or nuance. But when it announces itself, we would do well to listen. And we can listen as well to the voices of those with experience, those for whom the experience illuminates the realities of today. Suzanne Berliner-Weiss writes, "I am a survivor of the Jewish Holocaust and understand the system of hate firsthand. Hitler's war against the Jews aimed to eradicate our history and the Jewish people. Nazism is hatred of the other. It is racism. Judaism, the religion and its traditions, does not stand for racism. Conflating Zionism and Judaism is an unforgivable crime against the Jewish people, a crime against Palestinians and a crime to humanity. I was saved from Hitler by world solidarity. I was among the thousands of Jewish children in France who were saved by the solidarity of the Jewish resistance, communities of Christians in southern France, and the peoples of the world united against Nazism. To be against Israel's policies is not anti-Jewish. It is not anti-Semitic. We claim the Palestinians as our brothers and sisters. We are all humanity. We say, not in our name." End quote. For the victims of the Holocaust, the world closed its eyes, its hearts and its doors until it was too late. Today we remember and honour them with respect, with love and with bitter regret. But let us not close our eyes, our hearts, our doors in the face of genocide and oppression happening today in Palestine. Let us not make the same mistakes again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. I call Liam MacArthur to be followed by John Mason. Mr MacArthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I, like others, and as is customary, congratulate and thank Jackson Carlo for securing this debate, but more than that, thank him for, I think, the dignified, passionate and therefore it's a very powerful way in which he articulated the sentiments I think we all share and set the scene so well for this now annual debate. It provides yet another, I think, invaluable opportunity to renew our Holocaust remembrance. And while this debate is never likely to be one of great controversy, the context in which it's taking place, with anti-Semitism, racism, extremism on the rise here in Europe and around the world, it serves as a timely reminder of the importance of redoubling our commitment to bearing witness to the horrors of the Holocaust. As others have said, on the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the most notorious of the Nazi death camps, which institutionalised the murder of Jews and other minorities during a murderous persecution that claimed the lives of over 9 million people. Bearing witness, remembering, is the very least that we can do. The theme for this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is for a better future. Such a future, though, is only possible if we confront head-on the depth of inhumanity that allowed the Holocaust to occur, and acknowledge with honesty, with clear-sightedness, that the Holocaust was allowed to happen, as others have observed, only because thousands, if not millions, of ordinary people chose to look the other way in the face of persecution and discrimination. A failure to confront, acknowledge and accept these truths see us run the risk of allowing the horrors of the Holocaust to happen again, as unimaginable as we may think that to be. The Holocaust Educational Trust, for whom I offer my genuine thanks, have this year shared the work of Professor Gregory Stanton, who has developed an academic model for the 10 stages of genocide, which never happens in a vacuum. The Holocaust did not begin with death camps and gas chambers and forced ghettoisation. Before we get to steps 8, 9 and 10, persecution, extermination and denial, there are steps 1, 2 and 3, classification, discrimination, polarisation. If we want to safeguard a better future, we must be willing to challenge racism, bigotry and attempts to other those who may be different, in a minority or simply vulnerable. Of course, this may be the last year during which the Holocaust remains within living memory, and as first-hand testimony fades and as anti-Semitic extremist and exclusionary rhetoric gains traction here and across the world, it's more important than ever that we commit to reflect on the circumstances that normalise such widespread murderous persecution of Jews and other minorities, simply for being themselves. I was struck this year by the story of David Graeber, one of 3 young Jewish men responsible for burying the Oneg Shabbat archives during the mass deportation from the Warsaw Ghetto to Treblinka in 1942. Graeber and his peers collated testimonies, photographs and artefacts from the ghetto to ensure the atrocities and the reality of life under Nazi rule were a matter of record. At just 19, David buried the archive, knowing that he would not live to see its discovery, and included in it his last will and testament, in which he stated, "For me, it is enough if future generations remember our times and if our sufferings and pains are mentioned. May the treasure fall into good hands, may it last into better times. May it alarm and alert the world to what happened and was passed out in the 20th century. Now, here, in the 21st century, we owe it to David Graeber and the millions that lost their lives in the Holocaust to be the good hands that, even in these better times, attest to the horrors of their suffering and never cease working to ensure such horrors never happen again." We can't afford complacency. Indeed, this year also marks the 30th anniversary of Srebrenica genocide, which claimed the lives of 8,000 Bosniak Muslim men on the basis of their identity. More recently, the barbaric 7th of October Hamas attacks saw the most violent and intensive attack on the Jewish population since the Holocaust, killing more than 1,200 Israelis. We've also seen that what has followed in Gaza has been unconscionable levels of indiscriminate violence. A ceasefire, while welcome, appears fragile. On this Holocaust Memorial Day, it is more important than ever to restate the case for a lasting peace for Israelis and Palestinians alike. It's incumbent on us to assert the truth of the Holocaust and the history of its victims, their pain and suffering, but also bravery in the face of present-day polarisation, discrimination and persecution. A better future is possible, but only when we commit ourselves to never forget the darkness of the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr MacArthur. Before I call the next speaker, I would advise that due to the number of members still wishing to speak in the debate, I am minded to accept a motion under Rule 8.14.3 that the debate be extended by up to 30 minutes. I invite Jackson Carlo to move the motion.
Happy to so move.
Thank you, Mr Carlo. The question is that under Rule 8.14.3, the debate be extended by up to 30 minutes. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is agreed. I now call John Mason to be followed by Sandesh Gohani. Mr Mason.
Thank you very much, and I thank Jackson Carlaw for lodging his motion and bringing this debate, and I note that some 44 MSPs had supported the motion by lunchtime today. Jackson Carlaw in his motion mentions genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur, and it's also been mentioned Holodomor in Ukraine in 1932-33, when some 4 to 5 million people died, roughly 10% of the population. And also, of course, the Armenian genocide under the Ottomans in 1915-17, when around 1 million died. But there is something especially horrendous about the Holocaust, with the systematic killing of 2/3 of European Jews. I've spoken before about how I felt when visiting Auschwitz-Birkenau, and particularly in seeing a railway built for no other purpose than the killing of Jews and other minority groups. I do not think we can mention the Holocaust without referring also to the State of Israel and its foundation. Since my expulsion from the SNP for stating that what Israel had been doing in Gaza is not genocide, a position I stand by, I have received many encouraging messages from Jewish people in this and other countries. One author, Lynn Julius, sent me a copy of her book, Uprooted, which has been a fascinating read, as I had not realised how Jews had also been so long persecuted in the Arab world, as well as in Europe. We sometimes think that Israel exists mainly because of European Jews arriving after World War II, but in fact some 650,000 Jews also arrived because they had been expelled or their lives made virtually impossible in Arab nations. I had not realised that the leaders of Iraq had been so close to Hitler and the Nazis during the war and had encouraged anti-Jewish settlement in a similar way to Germany. Another lesson I've so often learned in reading books, watching films and visiting sites associated with the Holocaust has been how it started with small things and gradually built up, as Liam MacArthur has reminded us. Boycotts of Jewish shops, barring Jews from ice rinks, closing Jewish schools might have seemed like fairly small individual issues at the time. But of course, looking back, we see that the anti-Jewish sentiment slowly but surely built up over a number of years to become open discrimination, hatred, and finally persecution and attempted annihilation. And this is one of the things which I think worries Jews in Scotland and around the world today. Is the criticism of the current Israeli government's actions, some of which is definitely valid, spilling over into a lack of tolerance of Jewish people around the world? Because while not all Jews support Israel and not everyone in Israel is Jewish, the reality is that it is the only Jewish state in the world, and very many Jews identify closely with it, having friends and family there. During this last year, I had my main holiday in the Baltic states and visited the excellent Jewish museums in Riga and Vilnius, and much of the focus there was on the Holocaust too. Vilnius was called the Jerusalem of the North by Napoleon in 1812, and in 1939 there were over 260,000 Jews and over 100 synagogues in that city. Now there are perhaps only around 2,000 Jewish people there and only one active synagogue. To end on a slightly more positive note, my final destination in Lithuania was Kaunas, and I spent less than a day there. However, I did have time to visit Sugihara House and learn something of the story of Japanese Vice-Consul Chiune Sugihara in 1939-40, who, together with acting Dutch Consul Jan Swartzendijk, saved some 6,000 lives, mainly Jews, who had already fled Poland, by issuing visas for them to escape through Russia to Japan. When the Soviet Union came into Lithuania in 1940, the consulates were due to be closed, but Sugihara held on and issued up to 300 visas a day for 29 days, in defiance of orders from Tokyo. So even among the darkest days of the Holocaust, there were flickers of light. It is important that we look back and learn from awful things like the Holocaust which happened in the past. But we should also be challenged and encouraged by people like Sugihara, who went against the tide and stood up for those who were despised and oppressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mason. I call Sandesh Gohani to be followed by Pauline McNeill. Dr Gohani.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I wish to remind members that I was born and raised in Golders Green, and I'd like to thank Jackson Carlo for securing this debate tonight. And tonight we do mark Holocaust Memorial Day, a solemn occasion to honour the 6 million Jewish men, women and children murdered by the Nazis, alongside millions of others who perished under the same brutal Nazi regime. We stand together in remembrance, not only to mourn, but to reaffirm an unwavering commitment, never again. Holocaust Memorial Day falls on the 27th of January each year, marking the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, the largest Nazi concentration camp. And this year, we commemorate the 80th anniversary of that liberation. We reflect on the theme for a better future. This theme compels us to not only remember the horrors of the past, but to act in the present, to challenge hatred, confront prejudice and build a world where atrocities can never happen again. I recall visiting southern Poland as an 18-year-old. I explored the vibrant city of Krakow, its bustling market square, its rich history. And then I travelled westwards to Auschwitz. Joy and warmth seemed to vanish. Walking past razor-wire fences and grey brick buildings, I was confronted with a reality too horrific to comprehend. Above me, the sign read, Arbeit macht frei, work sets you free. But in the 1940s, there was no freedom here, only death and suffering. And what struck me the most, and still haunts me, is the eerie silence. Hours before, I heard birds singing, people laughing, and yet in Auschwitz, even nature seemed to recoil from the horror. The air itself carried a weight of those who had suffered. It shocks me that a third of young adults in the UK cannot name Auschwitz or any other concentration camp. And this is a sobering reminder that it is our duty to educate, to remember, and challenge denial. And it's never been more urgent. Holocaust denial and distortion are rising, fuelled by misinformation and the dark corners of social media. Studies show 23% of people in the UK have encountered Holocaust denial online, and a significant proportion of young people, our future leaders, do not know that 6 million Jews were murdered. Some believe the number to be far lower. These stats are deeply troubling, and they demand action. As representatives of Scotland, we must ensure that Holocaust education is not just an academic exercise, but a national priority. Institutions like the Jewish Heritage Centre and the Jewish Archive Centre play a vital role. And in my Glasgow region, Garnet Hill Synagogue stands as a beacon of history and remembrance, its Heritage Centre offering profound insights into Jewish life in Scotland and the Holocaust. And I've been privileged to engage with these institutions, commend their work in Parliament and support new educational initiatives, such as the Holocaust Heritage Walking Trail in Glasgow. These efforts must continue, and we must do more to ensure every young person in Scotland learns about the Holocaust, not just as history, but as a warning of what happens when hatred goes unchallenged. The Holocaust was not an accident. It was the result of anti-Semitism, propaganda, and the systemic erosion of human rights. And while we say never again, we must ask, where was never again in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia or Darfur? Where is it today as anti-Semitism rises once more? We cannot be bystanders. We must challenge prejudice, confront denial and educate future generations. The theme for a better future reminds us that remembrance alone is not enough. We must act. We must make Holocaust education a national priority and ensure the lessons of history shape the future we strive to build. It happened. It must never happen again. And it is our duty to ensure that never again finally means what it says. Never again. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr Gohani. And I call Pauline McNeill. Ms McNeill.
Holocaust Memorial Day is without parallel in its importance. I want to commend Jackson Carlo for his leadership in this regard, and the eloquent speeches they not only give today. Every time I've heard you, Jackson Carlo, I think that you have been very importantly influential, and I think the work that you've done in this is to be commended. The theme of Holocaust Remembrance Day is about dignity and human rights and the importance of collective action to prevent the spread and hatred and denial of the Holocaust. In your opening speech, Jackson Carlaw, you talked about other genocides. You talked about Bosnia. It gives me an opportunity, as others have had, to mention my visit to Srebrenica only the tail end of last year. In Bosnia, Serb nationalism, the past remains omnipresent. This happened in the 1990s. This genocide against the Bosniaks, Muslim Bosniaks. Mothers I spoke to had their sons murdered, their brothers murdered, and I was alarmed when they described that today the denial of this genocide is still in existence. The Sarajevo Hills, better known for those who were old enough to remember the Winter Olympics, and Torval and Dean. Eyes were closed when Serbs put Bosniak neighbours into concentration camps, and that wasn't that long ago. The motion notes the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. It will be appreciated that there are many other concentration camps, as other members have mentioned, such as Treblinka in Poland, where around 800,000 died, and Belzec, where 600,000 died, waiting to be sent to their death. Many people starved, died of disease, or were worked to death. It's unbelievable that a relatively short time ago these horrific events took place, where 6 million Jews across German-occupied Europe were murdered for being Jewish, an ideology based on hatred, and it began its journey in a democratic country. It's difficult to read and learn about humanity's worst period in history and the evil that humankind is capable of, but it is important that we remember, as said. I visited Auschwitz-Birkenau on the very last day of 2018, and no amount of reading prepares you for the sheer scale and horror of the camp. But I do think it's something that everyone should do and face. When people arrive there, they will be asked by the guide not to take photographs in certain areas, as one such area will have people's personal effects, including their shoes, suitcases and so on. They're asked not to be photographed because these are those people's personal belongings, with their own personal story about how they arrived in that dreadful place, and that part of it should remain personal. Camp Commandant Rudolf Hoss expanded Auschwitz to construct a second camp at Birkenau for industrial murder. I think others have said, if you've seen the memory at Birkenau to those who died, you will notice that there are actually houses behind the Birkenau camp who were there at the time in the 1940s. So, as others have said, unfortunately people knew and they looked on as these concentration camps murdered Jewish people and others. The testimony from survivors who escaped is vital, because without them we would not begin to get our heads around the horror of what happened. How could it happen at all is the vital question for any person who is interested in ensuring that it will never happen again. We must educate every child about those sad facts. No generation must be left out. It reminds us that we must have robust policies tackling hatred and prejudice against any group in society. And anti-Semitism, as the survivors have said, is far from disappeared. There are fewer Holocaust survivors, as we know, each year that we mark this anniversary, and soon there will be none. So those generations that live on, that know, and politicians like us must ensure that it's never forgotten. I just want to quote from Andy McKeever, who was on the trip with me, and he wrote a really great article called "Moderates Must Rise to the Challenges of Populist Nationalism." It's only something Andy McKeever could write, but it's a brilliant article. We cannot be bystanders where we see the hatred of others. I won't stand by where I see Palestinians in Gaza. In my opinion, there is a genocide. But let the courts decide. Let the courts and the law decide if it is or not. But whether it's Gaza, whether it's Bosnia, or whether it's Cambodia, which I think was really important that Jackson Carlaw mentioned this, as human beings and as politicians as well, we cannot be bystanders. We need to call out what we see without prejudice. I'm proud to be part of this debate, and I thank Jackson Carlaw again for bringing this important debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms McNeill. I now call on Minister Siobhan Brown to respond to the debate. Around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I wish to express my gratitude to Jackson Carlaw for sponsoring today's motion. And I sincerely thank everybody for their very powerful contributions and who have kindly taken the opportunity.
Minister, I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you please put your microphone?
Sorry.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Who have taken this opportunity to commemorate Holocaust Memorial Day this evening. This is the second year that I have responded to this debate, and I have to say it is one of the most powerful, emotive, thought-provoking and grounding debates, as it highlights in what appears to be sometimes a very volatile and our busy world, our vulnerability as humanity. If I may just take a few moments and everybody's contribution tonight was very valuable, but Jackson Carlaw, you're always very powerful in your contributions, and I know about your ongoing commitment to highlight the atrocities of the Holocaust. And as you mentioned in your speech at the end, the few and frail survivors who are disturbed by the fears for the future. Colleagues, this is why it is vital that we ensure that this never happens again. Another powerful contribution was the young person that Paula Kane heard from in his constituency, Ben Blands, who, amongst the darkness of today's world, which it must appear to a lot of our youngsters, still had a really positive and a hopeful view, which I personally found very inspirational and very powerful to hear. Presiding Officer, I echo the heartfelt words offered by my fellow members in paying tribute to the 6 million Jewish people systematically murdered during the Holocaust, the countless others killed by the Nazi regime, and the untold numbers of people whose lives were callously taken from them following the genocides that took place in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur. The horrors of the Holocaust are a stark reminder of the devastating consequences if prejudicial attitudes are not challenged and confronted, as my colleague Pauline O'Neill eloquently put in her speech. And despite all our political differences, it is deeply moving to witness this chamber united in honouring those whose lives were decimated by such terrible persecutions. This year's commemoration is a seminal moment as we mark both the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau and the 30th anniversary of the genocide in Bosnia. Following the Nazis' ascent to power in 1933, they increasingly ramped up an anti-Semitic rhetoric prior to passing laws which gradually stripped Jewish citizens of their most basic human rights, including forcing them to wear yellow stars, singling them out for their ever-worsening persecution. This slow but precise process of dehumanisation would later culminate in one of the most heinous acts in human history, as the regime attempted to exterminate all Jewish people in Europe. The beginning of the Bosnian War in 1992 presents a chilling parallel, as the non-Serbian citizens were first compelled to wear the white armbands, setting in motion the infamous practice that would later be known as ethnic cleansing. The most monstrous example of such brutality was to occur in 1995, where in the town of Srebrenica witnessed the genocidal massacre of 8,000 Muslim men and boys by Bosnian Serb forces in what was one of the largest incidents of mass murder in Europe since World War II. In reflecting on the sheer inhumanity of these atrocities, we are reminded of this year's theme, which encourages us to strive collectively for a better future, while challenging those who attempt to deny or trivialise the Holocaust or any genocide. Scottish Government must lead by example and remain ever vigilant so that so that the grave consequences of the past can never be repeated. And in this spirit, I was proud to help support the commencement of the Hate and Public Order Act in April last year.
This, alongside our hate crime strategy, will ensure that we take the robust measures necessary in response to criminality rooted in prejudice and provide confidence that all incidents will be treated with the utmost seriousness. Last year, we were privileged to assist with the UK's presidency of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance in a series of engagements, including at Kelvin Grove Museum in Glasgow, where the First Minister spoke about the importance of working together to tackle the growing threat of anti-Semitism. Recognising, as well as the deep-seated nature of prejudicial attitudes, we are working in close collaboration with partners to prevent such behaviours from taking hold and undermining our commitment to community cohesiveness. Let me be clear that discrimination, including anti-Semitism, must be challenged through educating our children about all cultures, faiths and belief systems, and ensuring that they learn tolerance and respect. The Scottish Government's aspiration is for our children and young people to feel equipped to go out into the world as citizens of the tolerant and inclusive Scotland that we all want to be part of. Tomorrow, I have the honour of participating alongside the First Minister at the Holocaust Memorial Day Scottish ceremony, which has been expertly organised by our friends at the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust. And it is deeply saddening that the ceremony will be without Henry Wooga, who, as Jackson Carlaw said, tragically passed away last year, and whose devotion in support of Holocaust Memorial Day will be an immeasurable loss. However, I am humbled for the opportunity to share a platform with a number of truly inspiring individuals, including Holocaust survivor Alfred Garwood, MBE, and Smeo Beisho, who escaped the Bosnian genocide. The remarkable courage of all our survivors in the face of such dire circumstances and their unwavering sacrifice in sharing their testimonies is a display of selflessness that all of us should forever be indebted. I sincerely hope as many of you can join us tomorrow night at this commemoration. Presiding Officer, the responsibility of building a better future is incumbent upon each of us gathered in this chamber and across all of our diverse communities. I have been particularly struck in my conversations with Jewish and Muslim communities about how anti-Semitism and Islamophobia continue to impact their daily lives. And to you, I say that Scotland is, and it always will be, your home. Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel once said, "To forget would not only be dangerous, but offensive. To forget the dead would be akin to killing them a second time." We must always honour these words in our duty to the Holocaust and genocide's remembrance, whilst also aspiring to a better future, where one day nobody need to live in fear simply for who they are in a group to which they belong. It is therefore paramount that we support one another while resisting any and all voices seeking to divide us, and instead work in harmony towards a caring and an inclusive world which provides opportunities for each and every one of us to flourish. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the debate, and I close this meeting.